Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Leslie presents. And now your host, Paul Leslie.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's with great pleasure we welcome our special guest, the one and only Charles Fox. It's a great pleasure.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, too.
So who is Charles Fox?
Well, I guess that's a question I've never been asked quite so directly before, but I'm a composer. I've been writing music for the past, nearly 50 years. I studied in Paris many years ago with one of the great composition teachers, Nadia Boulanger, who was Aaron Copland's teacher 40 years before me. I've had a very wide and varied career in music, starting with, when I was 15 years old, I played in bands. I had a band in the Catskill Mountains and discovered Latin music and got really into playing Latin music and salsa. In fact, my earliest songs were in Spanish. When I started playing some of those Latin bands, I didn't speak Spanish, but I had a feel for the music. And then I went to Paris after. When I came back, I got back into playing in bands, and one thing led to another, and I knew I needed to spend my life doing composition. So any chance I had that would give me the opportunity to compose music, like doing short films in USIA Films, U.S. Information Agency, one thing led to the other. And here it is, many years later, I'm getting to talk to you, Paul Leslie, on the phone.
So you mentioned the experience of getting a musical education in Paris. What was the most important thing you learned from that experience?
Nadia Boulanger was an extraordinary woman. She's considered to be the most important composition teacher of the whole 20th century. I mean, she taught Virgil Thompson and contemporary composers like Philip Glass and Quincy Jones, Michel Legrand. I mean, from her and from my experiences in Paris, I realized the importance of music and the depth of music and how music can change your life. It's very hard to single out one thing. I mean, I had a whole life there, and I was 18 years old when I came to Paris. I lived in the Bronx, grew up in the Bronx with my parents, and it was a whole revelation. The world of Paris, learning French. I didn't speak a word of French when I came there, so I had to study French just to get by, and of course it's part of my language. Being exposed to the world of music, this is 1959, 1960, the world of avant-garde music, which we are so used to now, is very new then. The music of Pierre Boulez and people like that, and going to the operas regularly 2 or 3 times a week in Paris, Magnificent Opera House, and hearing the works, such great works of the past, and all the contemporary concerts. I mean, every day was a revelation to me. Every day was new, and of course Paris itself is, for me, the most beautiful city in the world. So combination of all those things and being a student, I was there for 2 years, and it affected my life. It changed my life.
Our special guest is Charles Fox. Which composers have had the greatest influence on your work?
As far as classical composers, I would say maybe Bartók, certainly Stravinsky, Leonard Bernstein, and Eric Copland. I think I've been affected by Gershwin. Actually, Gershwin, was one composer who went to Paris to study with Nadia Boulanger. She told me the story. She wouldn't accept him as a student because when he came to her, he was already, what happened was he was at a party in New York, and when Ravel came to New York to conduct a tour and wrote Bolero, and someone put the two of them at the piano together, and I guess they had a good time. And Gershwin asked Ravel if he could come to Paris to study with him because of all of his greatness. I guess he felt he was lacking in some technique. And Ravel told him that, no, he's not a teacher, but go to Paris to study with Nadia Boulanger, who was his classmate at the conservatory. And Boulanger herself told me that when Gershwin came to study with her, that she felt he was already too far advanced in his own work, and that she would hurt him if she gave him any instruction of her own. So she declined to do that, which is kind of amazing. That I've been influenced, I think, by all the composers, going back to Bach and Mozart and Beethoven. But in terms of the more contemporary composers, I would say Stravinsky and Bartók. Now, in my songwriting, because that's a good part of my career too, I think I've been influenced by the Beatles music from the 60s. When I was first starting to write songs, it was a whole different landscape on the radio those days until the Beatles came along with their interesting, cute, quirky melodies and orchestrations and things. And of course, Burt Bacharach and Hal David with their songs, and Paul Simon, and even Jimmy Webb. I saw Jimmy Webb the other day, and I told him this. I said that when I was just getting started, I had already some of those great hits like MacArthur Park, and I said, my God, that was a revelation, that kind of song, a 6 or 7 minute song on the radio. So I think I'm influenced by a lot of people in my career. Those are some of the few.
Tell us about Norman Gimbel. How did you come to meet him, and what was your first impression of him?
Norman Gimbel, when I first started to work with him, was this enormously successful. He had written not all, but he'd written a lot of the bossa novas with Jobim. Norman helped bring bossa nova really to this country and with the English language. He wrote Girl from Ipanema and I Will Wait for You. Well, How Insensitive and Summer Samba. And then he worked with Michel Legrand on the score for The Bells of Cherbourg, and he had two big songs from that, I Will Wait for You and Watch What Happens. I had a project before I had moved to California. I was still living in New York, but I had come out here to do a film called Goodbye Columbus. And I say here, but I'm actually in New York right now as we speak. But I had come to California to do the movie Goodbye Columbus, and followed that with a series for Love American Style, which so I had a very easy transition from New York to California. But then I was asked to do a film called Puff and Stuff for Universal. It was a musical version of a successful television show that Sid and Marty Krofft did. It was a children's musical, and I was asked to write all the songs and do the score. I didn't have a lyricist that I worked with often, and so I was at the office of BMI one day, Broadcast Music, which is my licensing organization for performances, and they suggested Norman Gimbel. So they put us on the phone together. We decided we would meet, and after that we met and started a collaboration that lasted about 30 years, and we wrote many hundreds of songs together.
And so many of those songs are still loved to this day. Could it be possible to pick a favorite composition of yours?
You know what, really, that's a question I do get asked also, because, I mean, certainly some songs have been much more successful, so it's hard not to, Killing Me Softly, for example, has been recorded 1,000 times with 1,000 different people and more around the world, and it was too big to hit. It was a hit twice, once with Roberta Flack, and 20 years later with Another Generation with the Fugees. And I have theme songs, that are played around the world, and Happy Days and Love Boat, and I had a real personal connection with Jim Croce when we wrote I Got a Name, and that touched me very much. So I have those moments, but the truth is I don't have favorites, because I think of everything that I do. First of all, I try my best, my hardest, and I try to bring out everything in every work I do. And they all sort of earmark a point in my life. I can remember a specific song, where I was and what I was doing and what my life was like at the time. And I've done about 100 films. I've scored about 100 films. And of course, some, were more successful than others, and some had better time than others. But each one represented a part of my life, and I always worked to do my best work. And so for that reason, it's hard to single out. And the other thing is I have songs that I've written that the world doesn't know. They just, for one reason or another, didn't get the same attention or acclaim. And I don't love those any less. They're not any less important to me in terms of my output in my life.
You mentioned a couple of songs there. The Happy Days song. That's a song that so many people know. So many people can hum along to it, or they know the words to it. What was the inspiration behind that song?
I've done many television shows, many television themes over the years, probably about 50 different shows in all. Some of them got on the air, many didn't. Some of them were just pilots. But I've been very fortunate that I've had a number of series that have been long-lasting series. Starting with Wide World of Sports in 1965 was my first television theme, and I followed it 2 years later with Monday Night Football. When it came out to Hollywood, I was asked to do the theme for, I was asked to do the series for Love American Style, and we wrote the theme for that as well. And that was kind of my entree to Hollywood television and films. And Happy Days was originally an episode in Love American Style. Love American Style had 3 separate episodes within the hour. And one of them one time was called Love in the Happy Days. And it was a story of the 50s, okay, the young kids in the 50s. And anyway, ABC loved Love American Style because they could put the cost of Hull's pilots right into an episode of Love American Style. But they didn't buy it as a series. It's just sat for about a year or two until American Graffiti came out, with George Lucas's film, and that was the 50s with Ron Howard. And so ABC decided the time might be right to revisit the 50s. And at that time, I was asked to write the theme for it, and what was supposed to be was to sound like, the movie American Graffiti had a song called Rock Around the Clock, which was a big hit in the 50s, Bill Haley and his Comets. And Norman Gimbel and I were out to write a song that's It sounded like it could have been a hit in the 50s, but yet it would be a brand new song about our show, about Happy Days, and hopefully one that could take hold and become a hit all over again. And in fact, all those things happened. But the motivation was to write something that sounded like it came from the 50s, like was born there, but yet had the life and the energy to sound up and fun in the 70s when we did this, I think maybe 74, 75. And the series stayed on the air for many years, or maybe 10 or 12 years, I think, in prime time. But it's still on around the world. So that's the reason people know the song. I've heard that as I travel myself. I've turned television channels in different countries, and I've heard the Fonzie speaking in German and Polish and in Hebrew. You know, it's kind of funny to see that. But the music goes along with it. And the songs, they don't translate, by the way. The songs stay the same in English. Now, that Happy Days record that you see dropping on the screen has a little bit of history to it now, because there was one singular record made at the beginning of the show. When you see the record drop on the jukebox and start spinning and Happy Days song comes on, you can see, if you slowed it down, you would see that it said Happy Days, music by Charles Fox, lyrics by Norman Gimbel. That was a record that they had printed, stamped, just for use in that show. It was one of a kind. That record, earlier this year, was just inducted into the Smithsonian, and I along with it. And that's going to sit permanently in the history of American television in a cabinet along the Fonzie's jacket. So that was pretty cool, and I enjoyed that. And it's just nice to know that it's a little part of some kind of history, you know.
That's amazing. It's got to be such an honor.
It was a great honor.
One of my favorite songs of all time, both the lyric and the melody, is I Got a Name, which was recorded by Jim Croce. So I was hoping you could tell us about your relationship with him and about that song.
Norman Gimbel, again, and I wrote that song for a picture called The Last American Hero. It was one of Jeff Bridges' earliest films. There's a character in that Jeff plays, kind of a rough and tumble character, and he's a car racing guy, and he's also, he used to drive homemade booze to the destination that his father made. And because it was legal, the cops were continually chasing him. He learned to drive the car real fast and get away from the cops. Well, his father was eventually sent to jail. And it's a story about his relationship with his father and growing up, really becoming a race car driver. So Norman and I wrote a song. We needed someone to sing it whose voice was kind of the equivalent of the song. It was a character, had a lot of heart to it. It was energetic, had the movement of the feel of the road, you know, moving me down the highway, rolling me down the highway, moving ahead so life won't pass me by. That was the thought that should have come from Jeff Bridges' mind driving his car. There was a new artist coming up on the charts, Jim Croce, who had a record called Operator. It wasn't a hit yet, but it was moving up the charts. But we liked his voice, and we thought his voice really perfectly married the character and the song that we wrote and the character in the film. So we called Jim and played the song from over the phone, which is very unusual, but we had to get the main title recorded because the picture was about to be released. So Jim heard the song and said he would do it, and I went to the studio. I got his key. I hadn't met him yet. Got his key by listening to his record, and I found a comfortable key for my song. And I went to the studio, 20th Century Fox soundstage, and recorded the track for him to sing over with the full orchestra, strings and everything. And I brought that track to New York. And when I met Jim for the first time in his producer's office, the first thing Jim said to me was that he only heard the song on the phone, could he hear it again? So I sat at the piano and I sang it for him, played it for him. And he said, you know, I knew I had to sing this song because I knew it would make me feel closer to my own father, whose life ended at an early age. And so I was always very touched by that, especially since Jim Croce also died at a very young age. He was actually working on this song. He had some big hits before this release. This record was released. Bad Lord Brown was a big hit. And he was already a very popular guy. And our song came out, and unfortunately, the plane he was on went down one night, and the world really discovered him in a big way. And Time in the Bottle came out right on the heels of I Got a Name, and suddenly he had 3 albums on the charts at the same time. And I always remember him as a nice, sweet guy. We had a nice, brief relationship, but he was a lot of fun, and surely a good guy. And tragically, his life ended way too soon. But I was always touched by the fact that he talked about his father. You know, years later, Lena Horne sang that song. She recorded the song, first of all, but then she kind of did it her own way. She kind of turned it inside out, and she sang the song in her Broadway show, Lena Horne live on Broadway. And I saw that show when she came out to California, and she started singing I Got a Name as the second song, right after Stormy Weather, which is a signature song. And she kind of injected feelings about her father in the middle of that song. And it had like that very dynamic quality to it. And the audience started cheering her and standing up and giving her a chance, cheering ovation. In the middle of singing a song, I did the same. And anyway, I was so moved by it that the next day I wrote her a letter. No, excuse me, I sent her flowers. She wrote me the letter. I sent her flowers to her dressing room because I didn't know her at that time. And I just said, from a grateful composer, thanks for singing the song so beautifully. And she sent me back the nicest note, which I can quote because I have it framed actually in my studio. And she said to the composer of my favorite song, "You have no idea what it means to me. Every time I sing the song, I think of my father." So it's just an incident of a song that resonates with a lot of people in different ways, but the connection, actually, in the biography about Lena Horne, her biographer talked about her relationship to that song and mentioned me and Norman Gimbel. So it's quite an interesting background, but I'm always touched thinking about Jim Croce and what he left behind. It's a wonderful, wonderful history of his own songs, that he sang so beautifully.
Another great song, a favorite of many Barry Manilow fans, is Ready to Take a Chance Again. What did you think of the interpretation that Mr. Manilow recorded?
Oh, Barry was fantastic. We wrote that song for Barry. We didn't know Barry Manilow when we started to write that song, but the picture of Foul Play called for a song to be written that Goldie Hawn would hum along with and sing along with when she was driving along this beautiful coast of San Francisco, and she was about to pick up a stranger. She was about to have this dilemma. A guy was hitchhiking, and so there's supposed to be a song. The script called for a song called "Taking Chances" that Goldie would be singing along with, and it would plant a seed in her mind to take a chance. And then she was about to pick up this hitchhiker, and that would be really the plot of the story would begin. We wrote a song called "Ready to Take a Chance Again." That was Norman's idea that came up with that, based on the fact that she already had that. We see her at the beginning of the cocktail party, and Goldie Hawn is kind of, Chevy Chase is kind of trying to make time with her, and she just came out of a bad relationship, so that was the reason for Ready to Take a Chance Again. We wrote the song for Barry. He heard it, loved it immediately. He went off to New York. He made the record with Ron Dante, who produced it. And when he finished the record, he came out to California and he brought it into the studio, into Paramount Picture Studio, where myself and the producer and director, Colin Higgins, were. And he said, "See what you think about this." He put the tape on. We all got very excited. It sounded like a hit record. It sounded fantastic. He sounded great. And when he first started doing that in concert, actually, the first time I heard him do it in concert was at the Greek Theater, and the song was on the radio. It was already a big hit. And he started playing the piano. The introduction, the audience already started applauding, which means they knew the song, and which is always a nice feeling when you've written a song and people know what it is just from the introduction. And he was a little nervous about singing that song at first because it is quite rangy. Although he recorded it fantastically and he sounded great on record, this was the first time he had sung it live. So he kind of walked around the stage holding the sheet music, and eventually said, "Well, I got to do it." And he started to sing it. Well, of course, after a while, as soon as he started to sing, it was right in his range and all that. And very oftentimes after that, he would open a show with "Killing Me Softly," and of course, this is many years later. He still performs it in his act, and he still sounds great. We went to see him in Vegas a couple of years ago, and that show in Vegas at the Caesar's Palace, the song wasn't even in it was kind of more like Broadway songs. But because he invited us to come down, he put the song in the show, and that was pretty wonderful of him. Barry's a great guy and a wonderful artist.
You've written an autobiography, Killing Me Softly, My Life in Music. What was the experience of reminiscing and looking at old letters and all that when it came to putting this book together?
I never thought I would ever write my memoir. It wasn't something I planned to do. My wife and I found a shoebox in my mother's house about 2 years before she passed away in the Bronx. And these are the letters in the shoebox, about 200 letters that I had written home when I was a student in Paris during those 2 years. And those letters were kind of a portal back to my life, looking back, which is something I never thought of doing. I'm always looking forward and ahead to my next project. A literary agent heard about those letters and called me and asked me if he could read them. And my first reaction was, "Why would you want to read my letters? That's kind of personal, first of all." And he explained that he thought they might be interesting to kind of an open window to a door many years ago of a youngster, young man in Paris, 18, 19 years old, studying with this extraordinary, legendary teacher. And he just was curious. So I agreed to give him the letters. And there was Xerox, of course, by this point. He called me a couple weeks later and said, "I think there's a book here. If you would fill it out and tell me your life before you went to Paris and what happened when you came back." So I really accepted the challenge. He said, he said, I think there's a book here that people would really like to read. It could be really inspiring about people who pursue their dreams, and not just necessarily in music, but just people who have dreams that they want to pursue. And he said, if you just give me an outline of what you're going to do, I think I can get a publisher to agree to it. I said, well, I really don't know how to do an outline. I said, but I'll write the book. So it took me 2 years, and wrote it in longhand, and my assistant put it in the computer, and it was a very interesting experience looking back. Plus, I've done so many things over a period of 45, 50 years that there's so much to talk about. But I found the things I think will be the most interesting, the people I've worked with, like Fred Astaire, like Barry Manilow, Roberta Flack, that I think would be the most interesting. I also wrote about my ballets because I talked about classical music before. I mean, that's part of what I do too. I've written ballets for the San Francisco Ballet Company and Institute of Harlem, and I've seen those ballets performed in many countries in the world. So I've written about those experiences and some of the things that didn't end up so pleasantly, things that I didn't expect. You always do your best work, but not everything turns out the way you hope. And sometimes it turns out even more than you ever dreamed. So those are the ups and the downs of anyone's life in any creative world. And I wrote about them.
For my last question, for anybody who hears this interview, wherever or whenever, what would you like to say to all the listeners?
Well, especially to people who have dreams that they want to pursue, they may think that it's above their reach, it's out of their reach. But I think it's important to try to pursue your goals and your dreams. We're often told, well, this is too hard, you can't do this, and one can't do that. I always believe, and I've told this to my own children, that if you study hard and you work hard and your dreams are real, something that's really a real dream, not an imaginary dream, but something you think you'd like to do, then pursue it and try to achieve that, because then you have a satisfaction in your life for something that's real to you,
For more information on Charles Fox, please visit charlesfoxmusic.com and killingmesoftly.com. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Paul. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.